Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I'm Menas. I'm joined by my regular co-host, Paul Dennett. Paul, welcome.
Thanks, Menas. G'day, everyone.
How's your week been, Mr. Dennett?
Oh, saw some of the tennis on Friday night, which was awesome down at Rod Laver Arena. Melbourne Park is always a fantastic place to be. Filmed a little TikTok next to the Shane Warne statue as well. So, yeah, it was really cool. I love the Australian Open.
Excellent. Did you hear Jaleesa and I talking about the unfortunate situation where I can't seem to get you and her together?
I did, yes. I have a solution for that, but I'll tell you off air. But I think we should be fine.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked it out. I mean, if we can get it, well, I mean, we discussed it on the show. Obviously, if Jaleesa and I in studio, I've got the tech to, pipe you in, so to speak. But great news. You and I sort of discussed bringing Fatima back more regularly, who's appeared on the show. So she's going to be appearing, I think, this year quite frequently. We've organised a microphone for her. She does have a laptop and internet, so she's already doing really well. I cannot tell you, I've had thousands of messages this week about that they cannot believe Jaleesa doesn't have a laptop and internet. Maybe millions of messages.
Millions.
It feels like a lot.
I thought you were going to get thousands of messages for spending the first 10 minutes of a podcast talking about logistics.
People love to know what's going on behind the scenes. And I think people genuinely thought you and Jaleesa hated each other because you hadn't been in the same podcast for about a year. So we've dispelled those rumors. But Fatima, who's been on a couple of times, I love what she brings to the show. She's passionate. She's knowledgeable. She can also take a joke, which is important when you're working with me. And I think she's going to make some great contributions. She brings more of an international flavor. I mean, she follows, England, Pakistan, South Africa. She's got her fingers on the pulse. So she's not going to be on every show, but I think it's great to, have a third voice to talk some sense when you and I may go a bit crazy.
Absolutely. It was good also hearing the last podcast about Jaleesa getting the tickets to Leeds. I still hope to be there to be able to join her, but it's Ash is getting ever closer, and it's cool that at least one of us is going to be there for at least some of it.
Yeah, I haven't discussed with her the details of her doing some reporting for Cricket Unfiltered while she's over there. But yeah, I think even though she's taking time off her other employers, she hasn't actually applied for time off from the podcast. So I'm expecting, daily reports. She could actually, it will actually suit her tech perfectly because she could just talk into a phone and send it to me, which is about the limit of where we're at. So we'll get on the spot reports from Jaleesa. I did hear her on the radio yesterday when she hadn't turned the mic on and she just started talking with the mic off. So anyway, they're plaguing her everywhere. It can happen to anybody. I had a great afternoon. I went to North Sydney Oval and saw the Australian women's side beat Pakistan by 8 wickets. It was a weird fixture. It started at 1:45 on a Tuesday afternoon, but it seemed to really work. Because it was school holidays, they actually got probably a few thousand people in there. It was very hot, but a lot of the stands with shade were pretty full. It was a nice atmosphere.
Yeah, I saw your video from the Charlie McCartney stand. It looked like it was fun. We've talked about it before, the good and the bad of North Sydney Oval, but ultimately it is still a pretty good ground to watch cricket from.
Yeah, Australia are a much classier outfit than Pakistan, and they won pretty convincingly. But I thought there were signs there that were positive from Pakistan. Their team's getting better and better, and I think it's important that Australia make sure they play these series. That you could almost pencil in sort of 3-0 Australia before they start, but I still think it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely, and who knows? In 5, 10, 20 years, it could be a very different situation.
All right, so in this show, we've got all the headlines to get into. For all those people that want to keep politics and sports separate, maybe just switch off now, come back next week. So we're getting to all the headlines, and then we've got quite a few listener questions. We've got some lovely reviews. We don't have a large live audience at the moment on YouTube, but if anyone's watching live and wants to put questions in the comments, do it. In the background, we've got our social media executive, James, who's been doing all the stuff. He might join us for Can't Let It Go later on. So So yeah, let's get into the cricket headlines brought to you by Piccolo Podcasts. So it's Ash Gardner, the Australian women's player, has spoken out about the Australian women's team playing on January 26th. She said it's a day of mourning and a day of sadness for her Indigenous people, and she doesn't feel comfortable playing, but she is going to play, and they're making a lot of efforts to make the day recognise the solemn occasion. So it's a very vexed issue because Cricket Australia are doing the right thing in all their marketing and all their stuff online. There's no reference to Jan 26 being Australia Day. And I know some people don't like using the term Australia Day. I used it in the last podcast. And look, I don't mean to upset anybody. That's just, what the day's still called. And, I think it's probably on the government to make changes there. How do you see the situation, Paul?
I think... First of all, I think that Australia Day should be changed. The date should be changed, and my opinion is there are two reasons for that. Number one, it is the right thing to do. I think you would find that if you explain to a foreigner why we have chosen of all the 365 days available this day to be Australia Day, their jaw would drop pretty quickly. It's an extraordinary day to be Australia Day. It's the wrong thing to do to commemorate a day that resulted in such pain for the Indigenous population of the continent. It's just the wrong day to have it. Reason number two, which really doesn't matter, and it's reason number one is the only thing that matters. But I think from a pragmatic point of view, even people who don't want it changed must surely acknowledge that it's not working at the moment. That instead of a celebration of the country, is in the weeks leading up to it, it's just a debate and culture wars, and it's just unpleasant and it's not edifying. The thing is, I've heard a lot of Indigenous people talk about this, and they say, we'd love to join with you for the barbecue and the backyard cricket and celebrating that this imperfect country still is a great country. But we just don't want to do it on that day. And that's where I completely agree with them. So, keep January 26th as a day of solemn reflection on what that all means. Pick any one of the other 364 days for a day where we say, yep, it's not perfect, but let's get the boardies on, jump in the pool, have a sausage, have a beer, all those things, and have a laugh and say, aren't we a great country that Daryl Summers and an ostrich had a television show for 25 years?
Yeah, and for those listening overseas who wonder the significance of the date, so it's the day the first fleet arrived from Britain and colonized Australia. And as I said, the Indigenous people rightly feel that signifies, massacres, disease, colonization, and things that are very painful for them. And, I don't want to get on my soapbox or get too much into it, but as you say, the date needs to be changed to something way more inclusive. If we're actually really serious about the future of this country, we need to become a republic, ditch the anthem, find a new flag, and make our own future. And until we do that, all these problems are going to come up. On January 26th, it's Republic Day in India. When will Australia be able to celebrate something like that? So I just think it's a real mess, and I feel sorry for the cricketers being put in this situation. But I think overall, Cricket Australia have actually done a really good job. They've stopped celebrating anything on January 26th. It's effectively, I think, just another day for them. Like Australia played today, and in 2 days they're playing again. But in the end, that's probably not good enough now because of the pain and suffering around the date. You can't just sort of carry on like it's another day until something is done to have a proper Australia Day.
I agree with you about the Republic and the flag and the anthem as well. It's inevitable that the date is going to change. I don't know about you, but for me, this year seems to have been like a watershed moment that the dam has burst. And I think that the 26th of January being Australia Day, that is numbered in single figure digits. I think it's going to change sooner rather than later. And I was really disappointed at some of the responses to the tweets about Ash Gardner's stance. Some of the replies, you'd look at them, God, would you be proud of that reply if your family saw it? Like, it's some nasty, just dare I say, un-Australian replies in the comments. And I think that people should do better than that. Even if you disagree that, and if you think that the date should remain the same, I don't think that some of the comments that were put up there were worthy.
No, and Ben Horn wrote an interesting article in the Daily Telegraph today, making the point that next year there's a chance that Australia might want to schedule a test match against the West Indies to begin on Friday, January 26, because the West Indies coming here playing test matches late in January. And aside from the fact that whatever you think about the day, it's a public holiday, and therefore it's a great 3 days to schedule a test match for Cricket Australia to have the Friday, the public holiday, January 26th, then the weekend. But would Cricket Australia actually do that now in the light of what's happening in the current climate? Would they be comfortable with the Australian men's national team playing on January 26th? What do you think about that?
I think in the not too distant future, it could become a little bit like Anzac Day, that you play on the day, but you begin with, rather than celebration of Australia Day, because that's on a different day, you begin with a solemn ceremony in recognition of what occurred. And I think that Cricket Australia could take the lead in doing that. It might cost them a bit of criticism, but I think that would be an ideal time to do that next year and to recognise it for what it is. And then if the future Australia Day is on a public holiday, then on that day, if it's during the cricket season, by all means play the national anthem and have a ceremony celebrating the National Day then.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I agree. So that's where we are at the moment. All right. So moving on from that, are you able to turn your camera back on now, Paul, or is it still?
Yeah, I turned the camera off because I had groceries being loaded into the fridge behind me, which I thought would be not what everyone would want to see. The groceries are still, I think we're almost
there. We're almost there. So let's continue with the headlines. Well, we've seen the benefits of having the Australian players back in the Big Bash, with Steve Smith scoring a mammoth 328 runs in 4 innings at an average of 109, a strike rate of 180 with 24 sixes. That includes back-to-back centuries, one at Coffs Harbour and one at the SCG on Saturday night. I was fortunate enough to see the century at the SCG. It was absolutely phenomenal. Some of the most exciting, exhilarating batting I've ever seen. It's just been an absolute joy to watch Smith in this kind of form. It's just been incredible, hasn't it?
Yeah, I remember watching the Coffs Harbour one in full and absolutely loving it. It's just when Steve Smith is absolutely at his best in white ball cricket, there's no better batter to watch, because you don't know where the ball's going to end up. There's a bit of Phil Hughes about it, where he hits the balls to unusual angles and it's electrifying. You don't know what's going to happen. I've been so thrilled with the way that he's played. It's just a triumph. It's so, for the wonderful season he had in England in 2019. And then since then, he's been very good, but not quite as good. And to now this summer have seemingly got back to that very, very best. Then there is that sense of you're watching history. He may well go down as the second best batter of all time. It's an amazing thing to sort of to contemplate. And when he bats like that, it's joyous. And I feel a bit. Look, I stayed on his case as saying yes, he should be in the Australian T20 side for a long time. And it was only kind of recently that I changed my position from he's got to be one of the first picked to I'd still have him in the squad, but on an absolute belter, I'd have him out of the 11 and have him in the 11 for the pitches where it's maybe a little bit more difficult, and a 50-ball 50 is going to be match winning. As a couple of the innings he played in the World Cup that we won back in the UAE, he played a couple of nice little 15 or 20 run innings that were important. So I think, in my own defense, as this method of his batting, this brilliance of his in the T20 that we just said in the Big Bash, he's shown sparks of that at T20 level before, and certainly at 50 over level before, those 2 60-ball centuries he scored a couple of years ago in the 50 over stuff. But he probably wasn't doing it enough. And so I think I was justified in saying, I think his position in the side does come under some scrutiny. But now that he's answered his critics like that, then rush him back into the side.
Yeah, just extraordinary. The 24 sixes just blows me away. He's the leading six hitter in the competition. He hit 66 off 33 in his most recent innings against the Hobart Hurricanes, and unlucky to be out. Well, not unlucky. He missed a full toss, but he looks set for another century. Nothing lights up the Big Bash like a local star putting on a performance like this. We love all the international players coming here, but in the end, Australians are so one-eyed. We'd much rather see one of our own doing this than an overseas star. So just incredible.
To some degree, I'm not sure that it's one-eyed. It's what you're familiar with. If it was a massive overseas star who we'd come to know really well, like De Villiers and whatever else, I think it'd be close. But just a question without notice, I've been hearing a couple of times in the last few days commentators on the network say, the Big Bash is back. It's turned the corner. There's a sense of momentum around it. What are your thoughts on that, Menace?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I think this has been a much better season, but I mean, that's put up against two seasons that were heavily impacted by COVID. So we're certainly seeing a much better season in all facets, having the international player stars here at the beginning of the competition and then having the Australian test players come in when they all leave has meant that the quality has been pretty good. I still think the gap between sort of the best two sides, the Sixers and the Scorchers, and some of the other ones is actually too big for a competition of this standard, not in results, but if I compare it to the IPL, the teams there that are bottom of the table usually have just lost a few, they usually lose close games and are very competitive. Whereas I don't feel the lower sides in the Big Bash have actually been strong enough, the Melbourne Stars in particular. So I think it has bounced back. But, even if you look at the average crowd, you and I were tracking them pretty heavily. I mean, I think it's around 15,000. I mean, that's nowhere near what it was, say, 4 or 5 years ago. So I don't know. I think the ratings are up.
Sorry, I was going to say, I agree with that, but I think it's higher than maybe the season had started to feel like it was going to be. Like, I think it's, if you and I if we'd done our maths and worked out a prediction a few weeks ago, we might have guessed more like 12 or 13,000. I think it's a little bit better than we might have thought.
Yes, definitely. And look, I do wonder how the competition's going to finish because all the test players will be in India for the test series. So you're going to have the final series basically with not many overseas stars and not many of our big stars. And then it'll be, like we saw last summer, it'll be Hayden Kerr opening the batting and hopefully winning the Sixers a title, which is fantastic, but it's not the box office that, you'd expect of, say, Steve Smith.
True. It is so hard.
Sorry to pick on Hayden Kerr. He's a great cricketer.
He's a good player. He got 98 that game.
Yeah.
I suppose in a perfect world, you'd have no Big Bash until after the Sydney Test match, and then you'd have a clear window where all the Australian players are available. Australia would lobby the rest of the world to have no international cricket played at that time. Maybe we'd still have to compete with some of the other leagues, but we'd be able to compete with our best foot forward. And I could see it returning to something like it was. Maybe never quite as dominant as it got to with 80-something thousand for a Melbourne derby, but not far short of that. But then you look at next summer, and when we're talking about the fact that they might have to be playing when they're going to be playing the Test match series against the West Indies, well, it's going to be in January. So that's already going to be far from ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. So we won't have the Australian Test stars. They don't have the Australian Test stars, next summer. So you're right. So to answer your question, I've given you a lot of bullshit. What I'm going to say is I think it's bounced back, but I think it's a bit overblown. I think, you put it against two really shitty seasons. Of course, it's going to do better because the fact is people can go to the bloody games now because COVID, we're out of the worst of the pandemic. So yes, that's where I'm at. I just want to go back to Steve Smith. So I received Craig on Twitter says I need to eat some humble pie. But because I didn't have Steve Smith in my T20 side. So Craig he should be eating humble pie. He should be apologizing to me. He should be groveling to me because if he was an astute listener like Sam, who listens to the show really well, he knows that for years I have been saying Smith's best position in our white ball teams would be in Finch's spot, opening in 50 over and 20 over cricket. I started saying it before the 2019 50 over World Cup. I've been saying it, obviously, at times, like you, he wasn't in my best side, but I kind of gave up with the whole Finch thing because the selectors weren't going to move him. But I mean, you're telling me Smith couldn't have been a better opener for the last 4 years in both white ball formats than Finch? Absolutely not. It's rubbish. He's been wasted.
Yeah, and you would say that these three big performances that he's done since he's moved to opener would justify your stance. But I don't actually quite agree, because I think that, yes, Steve Smith's best position in T20 cricket, of course it's opener, because every single player's best position is opener. It's the best place to bat.
Absolutely.
So, and I actually think that moving to opener is not necessarily the reason that he's batting so well. I think that if he was batting at number 5, I think he's just batting better than he has been in the past.
No, so I disagree, because he was talking about it after the game that he likes starting, because I think Smith is not a natural 6 hitter. And I know that's farcical to say when he's just hit 24 sixes, but I think, and he said it after his second ton, he likes starting in the first power play, like everybody, because he can sort of get into the action. He can keep his strike rate up, hitting boundaries, but there's not the field spread. So he doesn't have to take on the deep fielders. And then when he needs to take on the deep fielders, he's been out there for 4, 5, 6 overs. So he, as you're right, everyone wants to bat up there. But I think in Smith's case, when power's not his natural game, that I like him opening where all he has to do is find the gaps, which he's probably the best gap hitter in world cricket. And, interspersed between the brilliance of the big hitting in his innings, we've seen beautiful square drives where he splits the 2 fielders at a point and cover in the first 4 overs and it runs away for 4. I mean, it's just magnificent. So I think...
But don't you think he's also improved? I think he's batting better than he has for a while.
I think it helps when, like, he's got those first 4 or 5 overs to get in before he starts trying to hit sixes.
Yeah,
but yes, he's got a point to prove. I mean, there's no doubt he was stung by being dropped from the World Cup, and he's come out and he's thought, I'm going to show the selectors what a mistake they made. And as you say, opening's the best spot. Well, then put our best bloody player there, because, it's like, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing, though, that our most destructive and best batters should always have been at the top in T20 cricket. It's ridiculous that Glenn Maxwell is not the opener. People say, he's got to come in after 12 overs. You've got to give your best players the highest number of balls that they can face, and also give them the opportunity to score runs when there are only 2 fielders out. And so,
So, sorry, so in 3 days there's a T20 World Cup, right? Who would your openers be? Assuming Maxwell's fit, you'd Maxwell have Warner and Maxwell?
No, Maxwell and David, of course.
So Smith's not even opening in your side?
No, I mean, I think I would have no problems with him opening. But if I'm picking the side that's going to, my life is on the line, of course I want David facing as many balls as possible. He might score 300.
I'm a bit off Maxwell. I like
maybe
David.
As well, yeah. All right, let's compromise. We'll go David and Smith. Can you get on board with that?
I can.
Can you get around that, as the Victorians would have it?
So let's just take a realistic view now. So George Bailey and Andrew McDonald have consistently ignored all our suggestions. So no doubt they're going to ignore this one as well. If it was Warner and Smith opening at the 2024 T20 World Cup, and even later this year in the 2023 50 over World Cup, would you be comfortable with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not who I would choose, but I'd have no problem with it, because I love Warner, I love Smith. They're both fantastic players. So yeah, it's probably not who I'd necessarily pick, but I'm fine with it. But I reckon we should have a campaign for David to open.
Well, I mean, I haven't closed the door on Warner just yet. Although I was saying to someone on the weekend that I find his form in the Big Bash quite concerning. Although he's got he got a good ball from Riley Meredith, he's just looked a bit behind the pace. And on Saturday night when Smith scored that brilliant century, Warner scratched around for 16, and that concerns me. That are we at the stage now where that sort of that 200 in Melbourne was kind of Warner's one good day, and we won't see another one for a while? A bit like, say, Mark Taylor towards the end.
Mark Taylor towards the end and the middle and the start.
So he started with like over 800 runs in the Ashes.
I'm just winding you up, mate. He really did do well against that powerhouse English bowling lineup in 1989. Was it Who was it?
The next 3 years, next 3 or 4 years, he was. I reckon until '93, you can say he was the best opener in the world in that 4 years.
I think he was a very, very good cricketer and was borderline test level, and that's a compliment, which his record will sort of kind of indicate. Now, where were we?
Warner. We're talking about Warner's form, like that he's getting a bit patchy. The fact that he struggled in the Big Bash when he should be dominating.
Yeah, and look, the difficult thing is going to be how's he going to succeed against India and England away? It's going to be just so challenging. So I'm still willing to persist with him, but I am worried, as I've said before on the show, about the high number of left-handers we have for the series against India.
So finally, Craig, I'll accept your apology whenever you're willing to send it. There's hours of tape of me saying Smith should open. So sticking with the Big Bash, I mean, as we're recording this, the finals are not decided, so I don't want to go too much into it, but the Sixers and Scorchers are through. Clearly the two best sides in the competition. Dan Christian, the Sydney Sixers star and Manners Masterclass guest on this podcast, has made the decision to retire from professional cricket at the end of the season. I wonder if Stephen O'Keefe will do the same. But yeah, I mean, Christian's been a magnificent short form player. And hopefully the Sixers can lift his 10th T20 title, which is, that's amazing to think he could. Well, he's won 9 T20 comps.
Yeah, that's what we always talk about. He wins wherever he goes, and he was always a player that I was kind of and didn't have stronger feelings towards. And then about 2 years ago, he became my favorite from nowhere. And I really enjoyed watching him and cheering him on. It does feel probably like it's about the right time now. He's still good enough, but it's probably now's probably a good time to give it away. He seems like a really nice guy and a smart guy. So, yeah, good on him. Great career.
Just one more point on the game from Saturday night. The Sydney Smash Derby was a Fox Sports only game, so it wasn't on free to air. So millions of young children around Australia were deprived of seeing Smith's 120 odd off 66 balls that may have inspired a few of them to pick up a bat. What do you think?
It's just disappointing. It's just kind of, we've expressed it many times on this show that how disappointing it is that the white ball internationals are behind the paywall and that some of the Big Bash is behind the paywall. And I know you can't really say much more. It's just you would hope that the games that are behind the paywall, they shouldn't be premium games like the Sydney Derby. That's in the football codes that they tend to say, right, the games that are going to be on free to air are the biggest games of the round and pay TV can have the rest. They should do the same, that they should schedule in advance to sort of say, okay, well, let's not have a Sydney Derby or a big Sydney Melbourne game as one of these. Let's pick without disrespecting the other sides, what amounts to a lower profile game. And that's your exclusive content for Foxtel, not a Sydney Derby.
I must say, though, whether it's got anything to do with it being available on free to air, the crowd was sensational. They got almost 39,000 people there. It was one of the best atmospheres at the SCG I've been to in a long time. Absolutely loved it. I actually walked over and found Jaleesa sitting in the outer, and she was. I found out some mates for you. It was the whole Supercoach crew sitting there, Paul. I saw these blokes and thought, Paul would fit in here so well. They were drinking beer, talking stats. I was just like, Paul would be right at home with this Supercoach crew.
And how did you fit in?
Calculators out.
Since you've bagged the hell out of Supercoach on social media.
No, they were really nice. Absolutely. I met the chiropractor. I can't remember his name. Had a good chat with Jaleesa. But yeah, fantastic atmosphere. And, I always say the Big Bash is much more affordable than Test cricket. If you want to get out to something, you'll always have a good time at the Big Bash. It's always something to look at.
Yeah, and that's kind of partially to what I was saying around the feeling of something has moved in a good direction with the Big Bash, because no matter what season, to get 39,000 there is impressive.
Now, there's a few topics around the women's game I want to touch on. But before we do that, Paul, you lit up TikTok with your Sarfraz Khan take. Now, for those that aren't on TikTok, Paul made a suggestion to the Indian selectors, and about 4 million people have now seen it on TikTok, and they've mostly commented. Now, I've been doing so. Sarfaraz Khan, for those not aware, is averaging 80 in first class cricket. Hasn't been picked by India. Now, I've done some digging. I've asked some Indian cricket journalists why hasn't he been selected. They've given two reasons. One is fitness, and the other one is he has a bad reputation that he struggled with behaviour early on, and even maybe has had issues with other teammates that make him. The reasons maybe he's not being picked. I mean, I've heard rumors he may have even hit another teammate at some point.
I haven't heard those rumors. I have heard the fitness ones, and I have heard the talk of that he hasn't succeeded in some of the A games when he otherwise might have. But I still think, and also there's a perception that runs are easier to come by than wickets are in the Ranji Trophy. That that's why I was so bullish on Mohammad Siraj a couple of years ago, because he averaged 23 in the Ranji Trophy as a fast bowler. And I thought, that's impressive. So on the flip side, you probably need to lop a couple off batting averages, but you've got to lop a lot off an average of 80 to get it down to somewhere where he shouldn't be picked for a side. He's played 52 matches as well, so it's not like he's had no sample size. It's only the first 2 matches that he hasn't been picked for. So anyway, it's interesting. They've picked Surya Kumar Yadav in his place, and I've got no problems with that. If I was an Indian fan, I think, just because a lot of his form is in white ball cricket, he looks so amazing. He looks like he could do something at red ball level as well.
He'd be opening the batting for you, wouldn't he?
With Tim David.
Yeah.
I know you think I'm an absolute idiot. I would genuinely consider Tim David for this Test series. I think he could do pretty well. And you're laughing because you probably laughed at the notion of David Warner playing for Australia 12 years ago.
I didn't. No.
Just like you thought they should never get rid of horses in favour of the motor car. No.
We go back to I didn't even want to bring in the metric system. All right. So just on the Indian tour, I've been doing some digging. You and I reported that there was going to be one pink ball test match. I think India have scrapped it, which will be great for us because we're doing daily reviews and that's going to finish late. But I've been in touch with some journalists and we can't find anything about it. And we think India have decided, well, actually playing with a pink ball really gives Australia an advantage. We're just going to play, 4-day test matches on raging turners.
Well, wouldn't surprise me. It's par for the course that these series, that the details get locked in far too late. And one of the criticisms I have of non-Ashes Test cricket is that they don't lock things in earlier. I've said before. You asked me, hey, I'm getting married in August 2027. I'm saying I'm not coming. I'm watching the Ashes because I know that they're on 4 years from now. So the fact that there's still kind of a speculation about whether there's a pink ball test or not, and also people are going to say, well, this is naive, but pick what's best for Test cricket. If you had a pink ball test at that new big stadium and ended up getting crowds of 80,000 or 90,000, that is fantastic for Test cricket. That's what they should be doing it for. Anyway.
Right, moving on. There's a few issues in the women's game I wanted to talk about. The first one is actually going to point to another podcast. It's called The Ticket. That's the name of the podcast. And it's hosted by Tracy Holmes. And it's an ABC podcast. And she's done an episode on the plight of the Afghanistan women's cricket team. It's an hour podcast, and she speaks to some of the Afghanistan women cricketers that fled Afghanistan and now reside in Australia. She spoke to the former head of the Afghanistan Cricket Board who's fled Afghanistan. She spoke to Nick Hockley, the CEO of Cricket Australia, and I urge you all to listen to it. She provides all viewpoints. The former head of the Afghanistan Cricket Board is, he brings up, he says, well, it's easy for Australia to talk about human rights, but what about the soldiers that murdered all those people in Afghanistan? So he doesn't hold back. So look, I'd go and listen to it. We've talked about it enough on this show. I think where I stand. I don't think, unless Paul's changed his mind. But yeah, I think if you want to learn more, I'd really recommend the Ticket podcast. And maybe we'll talk about it when you've had a chance to listen to it. But put it this way, if the attitudes of the former head of the Afghanistan Cricket Board are pervasive in Afghanistan, it's a very sad situation.
For those of you who don't like political talk, fast forward probably 45 seconds. That's all I'll give it. I agree that it was the right thing to do for Cricket Australia to... Sorry, I'm going to cough. I agree it was the right thing to do to no longer play the series against the Afghanistan men's side. I think there's no winners. It's very sad. It's not a perfect solution at all. And I understand people who say the Taliban won't care, but I still think that it's the right thing to do, however difficult it is. I don't understand at all. There's no basis for comparison for the war crimes that Australian soldiers committed in Afghanistan. If they did, then they will be hopefully investigated, punished, and ferreted out. That's got no, what's that got to do with anything? This is a very, very different situation. So I think it's the right thing to do, but it's very sad.
Yeah, I agree. Staying with women's cricket, fantastic. The first ever women's under-19 20-over World Cup is underway. And I mean, it's really shown the way the women's game is growing. Rwanda beat the West Indies in a game, which just shows, Rwanda's got a great women's team. So I just think, women's cricket is just going to go from strength to strength. And I'm so glad that they've launched the first under-19 T20 World Cup, and then of course the Australia is playing in the T20 World Cup in South Africa next month, trying to go for a three-peat of T20 titles. So magnificent couple of months for women's cricket.
Absolutely. And when is the first proper women's IPL?
This year, I think, a bit later on, isn't it?
I think that's again going to be much like the men's was, a landmark moment in the sport. I'm really looking forward to that. And I reckon I
wait to see the auction.
Crowds.
Yeah, and the auction as well.
Yeah,
see how much the Aussie, Elise Perry, Meg Lanning, you name it. News today that New South Wales Cricket have launched a new competition for the women's game that's sort of a bridge between grade cricket and the WBBL, a way of developing the talent in New South Wales. So, that's a great initiative. And I just really thrilled the way the women's game is going, and they are loved. I mean, I went today to Northern Oval expecting a smattering of people, and there are hardcore fans of that team.
Maybe this is the wrong time to say it, but would it have been better if that game today had been a T20?
Well, it was a T20. It was a T20. It was the first of the 3-match series. So they just beat them in 350 over games.
Okay, I'm stupid.
No, you're not. Megan Shute took 5 for 15 today. It was a really good game. Any more highlights? There was one bit where Talia McGrath was bowling to Nita Dar, and Nita Dar pulled away at the last minute and was bowled. And the umpires went to Meg Lanning and said, "Would you like to appeal?" And she said no. But I think Australia would have been well within their rights to appeal.
Yeah, this is from the other day, isn't it? It's not today.
Yeah, it was a few days ago.
That's the one that freaked me out, is that it's just become everywhere on social media. I can see why, it's good clickbait. But all the comments are, that's out, that's out, that's out, that's out, that's out. And they are ignoring the fact that actually, no, it shouldn't have been out, because clearly she wasn't. People who said, she saw it was too good a ball and pulled away. It's like, come on, if she's that good at reading line of length, then she doesn't need to pull away. She looked up and saw that the bowler was almost upon her. She wasn't quite ready. She pulled away very late. And maybe it could have been given out, but it was fine. And the Australians handled it in the absolute correct way. If she starts doing it every second ball, that's going to be different. But it's the first and only time I've seen it that late. It's a non-issue. And all these people are saying, it should have been out, it should have been out, it should have been out. No, what happened is what should have happened, that people used a bit of humanity and intelligence and just said, let's just bowl the ball again.
Yeah, I think when you get into the spirit of game stuff, it's pretty murky, but I don't think this was, I think Nita Dar would want to be careful not to do that, because I thought it was, you should be ready. I mean,
completely. Your job as a batter is to be ready. She was wrong in doing it, but it was just like, why would you want to then enforce that? Because there's no malicious intent. It was just one of these things. Fix it up, move on, and that's what they did. And I think that's it was well handled by all, except for social media that's then talked about it for days as though it's an issue when it wasn't.
All right, that was all the cricket headlines. Now let's jump into listener questions and reviews. We'll start with the reviews. The first review, and you love this, it's on American iTunes. So I've got to listen. We've got thousands of listeners in America, but it's always good when we hear from them. It's Aussie Chris. He given 5 stars. He's wrote, "It's good stuff. Worth a listen. I just don't understand why Menas hates Pat Cummins so much. Having that much salt in your diet after the sacking of Langer is bad for your heart. Now, Chris, really appreciate the 5-star review. Thank you. I really don't hate Pat Cummins. I respect him. I like him. Think he's, I really like him. I'm glad he's Australian captain. Do I agree with everything he's done? No, but you can still disagree with someone and like and respect them.
Thing is, Manners, if they did thanks very much for the review, I agree. But if they did a thing where they had a bar of how much you liked someone versus what would be considered normal and average, and you pick a player like Peter Siddle, your bar would be very close to the average bar. You pick almost every player would be very close. Your bar for Justin Langer would be 10,000 feet higher than the average, and that is what is skewing your views.
It's not true.
What Cummins did, if anything, with regards to Langer, was brilliant leadership. He was an unpopular coach who'd done a good job and had his time, and he was, from the players at least, they got rid of him with the least paying. Cricket Australia should have handled it a whole lot better. I feel bad for the Langer for the way it went down. I have a lot of time for Langer in a lot of things, except potentially commentary. But I think his time as Australian coach was had run its course, and Cummins helped move him out, and that's absolutely fine. And the fact that you don't feel that way, it's your prerogative. But I think that, what did he say? It's not good for the heart. You got to calm down a bit.
Well, I mean, I just think Australia would be much better off if Langer was their coach until the end of this year. And, it's a bit like the Bob Simpson thing, that a lot of the players that played under Bob Simpson hated him at the time, but when they've looked back on him, they've thought how good he was for their career. And I think, the Australian players potentially are in that situation.
Yeah, but I think Simpson did a lot of good as well. And it was also time for him to move on at the time.
But don't you think, anyway, I don't want to get into it, but like Khawaja saying in the Sydney Test, I haven't done a warm-up all summer. Doesn't that worry you?
No.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean,
it worries me because I just think, okay, that's fine when you're winning, but when you start losing, all of a sudden everyone's pointing the finger at who's not working hard enough, and
But I don't think that they're not working hard. I think there's a difference between maybe under Lehman they weren't working quite as hard as maybe they should have. I don't know. I mean, he might dispute that. I don't think there's any question under McDonald that they're being mollycoddled and things are soft. I think that they're just probably approaching it at a professional level. But I think that Langer did a lot of good. But I just think his time had come to its end.
Yes. I mean, and so I think, anyway, look, next review. This is from Emp Style. 5-star podcast for a 2-star summer. Wonderful reflection on each day's play for a very average summer of the great game. I calculated only 702 of a maximum 1,350 overs for the 3 tests versus South Africa were bowled, and 679 overs of a possible 900 overs were bowled against the West Indies. That's approximately 53% of the game was played over the entire test summer. No wonder our cricket memories of summer are fading for the future generations. All they remember is a Big Bash game they went to when they were my age now. If I was Foxtel or 7, I'd be asking for a 47% refund. This is a relative of yours. The way he's pulled up all those stats, it's very au fait.
It's a good point. It touches on another point that I think I've had concerns with for a while, that each summer now seems to go by at lightning speed, even though the content is still there. It's just that because it's condensed so much, that the first test to the last test now is the shortest it's ever been. That I look forward to the Australian summer coming so much for the men's tests, and then before I know it, it's in the rear vision mirror in a way that it didn't used to be once. Now I know it can't be that way anymore, but I remember years ago that when the touring side would come and they'd play games and then get to know them, then there'd be longer gaps between the test matches. It gave a longer period for the summer to sort of breathe, and that's no longer feasible. It doesn't mean it can't be sort of regretted.
Yeah, good points there from Emp Style. All right, some more questions. This is from Kerwin and Kelso, our Kiwi friends. Hi, Manners and Paul. Would love to hear you discuss the relevance of 2 LBW rules, hitting in line and outside leg. Is it time for them to go when DRS is available? I think bowlers would say yes. I don't think so. But what do you think, Paul?
Great question. I love this question. Look, I've never actually had it confirmed, but I believe the reason that there is these extra rules, the reason that the law is not just if it's hitting, it's out, is that back in the day they probably wanted to give the umpire some parameters so they didn't start making cowboy decisions. I think that now we are at a time when these questions should be up for debate. Taking them separately, because I think that the removal of the need for the ball to be hitting between wicket and wicket, in other words, if it hits you outside the line of off stump and you are still playing a shot, should that be eligible to be out? I think there's more chance of that happening than there is for balls pitching outside leg. I'm very much in favour of considering that, because I think that so often you see a ball that's crashing into the stumps and it's ending up being overturned because it's hitting the batter outside the line of off by a fraction. I don't think that that's right. I think the bowler has completely won the victory, won the battle against the batter. The only reason the batter's still there is because they got their leg, their heavily padded leg in front of the ball, which is not what they're meant to be using. They're meant to be using the bat. And so I also think it's a huge point for confusion in the LBW law. The fact that you've got to, when you're explaining it to someone and say, oh, but if they're not playing a shot, that muddies the water. So many people think that that the not playing a shot is more significant than it is. I think if you just made the law, unless it's pitching outside leg, if it's hitting, it's out, that would make things a hell of a lot simpler. And I think that in this day and age where, by and large, batters do dominate, and I am one, and I think others agree, Test cricket especially is better when the ball is a little bit on top, then giving something back to the bowlers is probably not a bad thing. So on that side of it, I'm pretty in favour of it being strongly debated and considered.
Need to get you on the MCC Lords Committee. Good question. I think yes.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say the problem with the pitching outside leg stump is that the fear is that it'll lead to negative bowling, where bowlers sort of come around the wicket and just sort of pitch outside leg stump, attacking the stumps from that way. That could be very unattractive to watch.
And that is why I am not as bullish on that one. I would like to see that trialed somewhere. Apparently, my old boss was from New Zealand. She was very proud of the fact that New Zealand was the first place to have ATMs. Maybe they should trial this in the New Zealand first class season of saying it could pitch outside leg, because the whole notion of that they're going to bowl round the wicket and attack leg stump. If I was a batter, I'd be like, good on you. I'll take you for 4 through mid wicket every day. It might not actually eventuate. And you know what would have been not out if this law, with the current law, if Mike Gatting had just prodded forward a little bit more and got his pad in the way of the ball of the century, that pitched outside leg stump. That would have been not out. There are balls where left-handed opening batters get plumb in front, and it turns out, the ball pitched right arm over the wicket bowler. The ball pitched a millimetre outside leg stump, and that's overturned. I think it's worth exploration, and I think trial it, as you said, because you don't want a negative bowling coming in. I'm not so sure that it would actually come in. So I'd like to see a trial.
Leg spinners would obviously love that law if it were changed to pitching outside leg stump. Good questions, Kerwin and Kelso. Now from Martin Lawrence, which team is best placed to maybe challenge Australia in the Women's T20 World Cup? Martin has
go on, sorry. I was going to jump in before you said something. I want you to just pick one team in a minute, but go on, finish the question.
Martin said India, England, and South Africa. And I think that no one can actually challenge Australia. I think that's the thing. Australia's so much better. But in T20 cricket, if one player has an outstanding day, maybe they can cause an upset. And I think India has the talent, England has the talent, South Africa has the talent. They're the three teams that I think could beat Australia.
Maybe New Zealand.
Maybe they've got some good players, but I feel like South Africa at home could really do some damage. But I just don't think anyone's going to challenge Australia unless something special happens.
So for your one prediction, I'll put myself on the line as well. I'm going to say it's Australia-India final again. What are you going to say?
I'll go the same, because I think India's my team that I think actually is the best chance of beating Australia. Maybe Australia won't even make the final. Maybe it'd be like an India-South Africa final.
Well, you've certainly had a bet each way there, where you've implacably declared that no one can beat Australia, and then you've also said they might miss the final.
Well, that's it. But that's how T20 cricket. I sort of still feel that, if like what happened in the 2017 50 over World Cup, Australia came up against a rampaging India in the semi and were knocked out. But if they'd played that game 10 times, maybe Australia would have won 9 of them.
True.
So, but yes, good question, Martin. Thank you. We've got a couple of quick questions here. SS98 Smith playing baseball in India in the next few months. Now, this actually made me think that although it's not perfect preparation for the Indian tour, I like the fact that Smith's going to go to India in form with the sort of baggage of hitting all those sixes, and maybe he's going to take on the Indian spinners, and he's by far our best player of spin, and could actually do some damage.
Absolutely, and especially if they are raging turners, sometimes aggression is the way to go. That a streaky 60-odd can be worth 150 on another pitch. Depends whether they bring out the raging turners or they're the more kind of modern Indian wickets that are slow and low and then start to accelerate the game late on day 3 and into day 4. Then maybe you can play in a more orthodox fashion.
Agree. Now, Ruban, did the BBL unearth the next generation of T20 players for Australia, especially for the 2024 T20 World Cup? Or will Australia go with the same batch as last year's team? Good question, Ruban. What I would say is no, it certainly didn't unearth a multitude of talent. There's certainly been some bright sparks. Young Johnson from the Brisbane Heat's been bowling quick. He looks like a handful. Matt Short at the top of the order. But I don't think it'll be radically different. You'll see Josh Inglis probably play for Matt Wade. Maybe you'll see Nathan Ellis come in. But generally, I think Australia will stick with roughly, hopefully Finch is gone, fingers crossed. But I don't think there's no one in the Big Bash you've got, they have to be in Australia's side, apart from Steve Smith.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think they'll go with a very largely similar sides at what they had. What about Paddy Dooley? You reckon he'll be in?
Maybe. I still think he's the second best spinner in the competition behind Stephen O'Keefe. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to see him up against some really good batters and see how he goes. Let's see how he goes. He went to the T10 tournament the end of last year and played there. It's hard to tell because it's T10. They think, he was going at 10, 15 and over, but it's T10. Okay, Steve Carlisle, who's asked a question, who would be in your haven't played for Australia T20 but could do? And then he's given me his team. So I think actually he's had his team ready and he's just wanted to give it to us. Now, Paul and I haven't got a team for my haven't played for Australia T20 in my back pocket, surprisingly, Steve. But thank you for providing yours. So Steve's got Matt Short, Caleb Jewell, Sam Harper, Aaron Hardy, Jordan Silk, Ollie Davies, James Basley, Nathan McAndrew, Henry Thornton, Johnson from the Heat, and Todd Murphy, the spinner. That's an awful side. So, I mean, they would not win a game. I mean, yeah, it's not bad, but I mean, Jordan Silk playing for Australia, give me a break. So anyway, go on. What do you think of that team?
Looks all right to me. I mean, it's a hard one. I'd have to sit down with pen and paper and sort of work it all through. Because a lot of people like Ben Dwarshuis has played for Australia, I think, hasn't he? There's a few people that you might not think who've played for Australia have. I like the fact that Ollie Davies is in there.
I'd forgotten Dan Christian took a hat trick for Australia in one-day international cricket. When they were talking about his career, I totally, played one game, a few games, played against Sri Lanka, took a hat trick one day. Speaking of surprising things, just on this team, Matt Short's pretty good. Aaron Hardy is a huge star. I mean, he's going to be something special, a bit like Cameron Green. Ollie Davies, I like. Apart from that, I mean,
name one or two that you'd bring in then.
Okay, yeah, probably Hardy, Todd Murphy.
From outside this side that you would nominate. If you're going to say it's rubbish, who could you?
No, I just think it's a rubbish team, not Carlisle's pick. I just think, I just don't think any of these have made like a case to be.
Okay, but by definition, he's saying they can't have played for Australia. It did sound like you were saying that his side was rubbish.
No. I just mean I can see why these players haven't played for Australia. That's what I'm trying to say.
It'd be like if someone said, "Who's your best side that's has a batting average under 20?" And then they named it. You go, "Oh, that's terrible. He only averages 17." That bloke. He's like, "That's the definition."
I didn't mean that. Yeah, and then you're right. Like, who would I put in there?
Because I'm
Stephen
saying, but based on the rules of that he's nominated, it's not actually that bad.
No, within those rules, I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
if that was the Australian side, would never win anything. That's more what I'm saying. All right, so that's all the listener questions. Now we're going to go on to Can't Let It Go. So let's get into Can't Let It Go. That little bit of cricket news you just can't let go through to the keeper. I'm going to bring in our social media star, James. James, welcome.
Hello, gentlemen. How are we?
G'day.
James has been doing some great stuff on social media, joining us for Can't Let It Go. I know he's probably very nervous about this, but Muggers, what is your Can't Let It Go?
So, thanks for the introduction, Manners. But my Can't Let It Go is based on my favorite team from the BBL. I'm a Hobart Hurricanes supporter, unfortunately. They had a rough year, and Manners and I agree that their team is too good to be second last. So last night was just the last straw for me. I thought Ellis gave it his best go, and for Wade to leave an extra fielder out when we were already struggling, and Ellis then got 2 fours hit off him in the last over. I feel bad for Ellis because he's such a good bowler in that team. But yeah, what would you guys do to that Hobart Hurricanes team after that season?
Well, I mean, I think they'll do better. I mean, the squad's good, but they're just, there's a lot of issues with the coaching down in Hobart. There's been a lot of changes in the last couple of years. I think they need stability. But you're right, it's been desperately disappointing. I mean, Wade and David and McDermott and Ellis, they're 4 great T20 players. I mean, Joel Paris has had a strange BBL. He's gone really cold in the second half. So, I can't explain it. As you said, they should be doing much better.
One of the early shows of the year, I read out the 1 through 11 with just amazement, saying this side should win the. I knew that some of the players were going to leave, but this side should win the Big Bash. I don't know. Maybe they need to get Ricky Ponting on board as coach.
You're playing.
Yeah,
I mean, Zach Crawley was disappointing, and they've never won the BBL. A team that has produced a lot of good players, never lifted the title.
Yeah, I have 2 options which I would change for next season. I think I don't really rate Matthew Wade as a captain, fielding captain. I felt like he left a bit on the plate for the bowlers. I thought Nathan Ellis captained a lot better when we restricted stars to 130. And I think Tim David should open for sure. I agree with you, Paul. I'm a Tim David stan, you could say. I love the man. So I think he needs to open with Jewel. I don't think Ben McDermott was so out of form. They should have pushed him down a little bit. And, Tim David needs to face as many balls as possible.
Agree. I just no anti-Matthew Wade talk on this show in future.
I love him. I just thought his captaincy could have been a bit better.
Okay, good. What's your Can't Let It Go, Paul?
Well, I read with dismay on social media last night that the demerit point handed to the Rawalpindi pitch after the first Pakistan v England Test match has been rescinded. And they had a quote saying that the ICC appeal panel unanimously felt that the pitch had several redeeming features, which included the fact that a result was possible, and that 37 wickets were taken. Now, I was gratified to see just before the show that Malcolm Conn has tweeted out something also saying how much he disagrees with that decision. I just find that bewildering because that pitch, I watched every ball of the Australian series, or 98% of them, and they were 3 of the most turgid, boring pitches that have ever been produced. I didn't get to see as much of this game, but by all accounts, it was equally bad, and it was made into a great game purely because of England. And I went on at length on another podcast saying what a wonderful thing that was that England had done for Test cricket. I just think that this is wrong, and that if they've done this to appease Pakistan, that's obviously wrong. If they've done this for what they think are legitimate reasons, then that's obviously wrong as well. It's a critical moment for Test cricket in Pakistan. If you were to say tomorrow that Australia's touring Pakistan and playing Test cricket, and that there was going to be proper pitches. Now, I'm not saying Australian pitches are always perfect, far from it. But if at least Pakistan, I'm going to say we're going to have our best attempt to make pitches that have bounce and carry, give something to the batter with a bit of movement, and then later on spin. And if that's what they were able to produce, I would watch. I would be so excited about Australia touring there. I'd be thrilled. I'd be saying, "Let's go there, Manners." You know, if we can. If they were to produce the same pitches that they produced for us this time around, I'd still watch it because I'm an idiot and I've got no life. But I'd be like, "Oh, this is going to be a tough grind to get through," and that's no good for the sport. So I just think that's really, really disappointing that they've overturned that. It needed at least one demerit point.
Yeah, agree. I've got 2 can't let it goes. Now, Paul has kindly provided another one. He said to me, just sent me a text message, should we mention Michael Clark? I cannot believe I forgot to mention Michael Clark. So for those living overseas that, and this is what I find really strange about Michael Clark, around the world he's quite revered by other cricket nations, but in Australia, he's not very popular. And Paul, would you say he's the most unpopular ex-Australian men's captain?
Graham Yallop is there. I
mean, who else? I know Kim Hughes lost a few fans. I know Greg Chappell pissed a few people off when he stopped touring overseas. But it seems like Michael Clark is. There was video of him in a park in Noosa, and I don't want to go into it. It's everywhere. But he's been sacked from commentating in India. And he won't talk about it on his radio show. He's just it's not even sad. He's just sad. I mean, if you watch that video, it's just a fucking awful.
Yeah, look, a few things on that. I was joking about Graham Yallop. He's not. I'm meaning he's kind of. I just wanted to point out he had been captain. He's kind of not thought of that often. I think it is weird.
You hate him?
No, I actually quite like him. Have a look at his highlights from 83, 84. He was dominant against Pakistan.
Muggers has never heard of him. He's like Graham Her.
I'll do my research after this. Sorry about that.
Google 83, 84 Graham Yallop. I reckon Michael Clark has become so invisible. A lot of people, if you said to them, who was the captain before Steve Smith, a lot of people might say Ricky Ponting. It's kind of like there's a gap there. And it is weird how he is regularly gets gigs for ICC events and for overseas tours. But this summer in Australia, they had Channel 7 and Foxtel, SEN, ABC, and Triple M broadcasting the cricket. Basically, everyone in Australia got a gig commentating except for Manners, me, and Michael Clark. We got to do the Marsh Cup. What are you talking about?
Clark didn't do the Marsh Cup.
Apparently, Clark was the next one they're going to call if you said no. I think that it is a strange thing. And I don't know him. I've heard his radio show a little bit. I find him quite entertaining to listen to. So, yeah, it's a bit weird that he's that unpopular. I think it's disappointing that India has cancelled his contract for this. I think it's, he didn't... I know that the police are investigating whether they were causing sort of a menace to the public, but I don't think there was much. He was just, it wasn't a good look at all. But I don't think he should have had his contract torn up over it. I don't think he's the greatest commentator. He's very astute from a technical point of view of the game because he was a great captain in terms of being aggressive on the field. He's the sort of guy I'd be very interested in hearing his thoughts after the day's play. Not sure I want him for half hour after half hour after half hour in my living room, but they got Hayden over there who's even worse. So there you go. But not a good week for Clarkie.
I'm not. I think it's the right thing they did to sack him because you don't want that story sort of overtaking the cricket and sort of overshadowing it. So I don't mind that they've benched him. And look, interestingly, people that what's funny was Simon Kadich was trending on Twitter the day after it came out. And for those who remember, Kadich and Clark had that infamous dust up in the SCG dressing room. Kadich was trending. So, a lot of Kadich was being tweeted out. And, what I heard about Clark is that he was very selfish, but he wasn't a terrible bloke to play with. I think that should be made clear. He was selfish and it seems like he's, focused on himself all the time. But his teammates actually don't say a lot of bad stuff about him. apart from maybe Simon Kadich. But yeah, I just thought it was, it was strange to see an Australian captain in that situation. I sort of think, as I said, he's just the most unpopular ex-Australian captain. No one is sort of endeared to him, and he's just sort of floating away. You talk about his radio show. He is interesting because he's opinionated, but I'm just surprised anyone listens to it because, I don't know, like you, I can get 10 minutes of him's fine, but it's just a bit grating. Anyway, and my last Can't Let It Go, moving on from Michael Clark, is I went to the North Sydney Oval today to see the women's game, and a fantastic initiative from Cricket Australia. They had the trophy cabinet out there. So I got to see Australia's Women's T20 World Cup. I got to see the 50 over World Cup. I got to see the Women's Ashes Trophy. I got to see the Com Games Trophy. I got to see the Australia v India Series Trophy. It was a fantastic idea to get all the trophies there. And when you see them all together, you're just like, this women's team, we know it, but they've won everything. And I sort of think about all the kids that were there today, sort of getting to go up to the World Cup and look at it. Just fantastic.
The Australian women's cricket team's trophy cabinet and the world women's trophy cabinet is basically the same, one and the same. They've just won everything.
All right, that was my Can't Let It Go. So we'll wrap things up here. We'll be catching up next week. I mean, we're so excited. We're just a couple of weeks away from the Test series versus India beginning.
4-0, baby. 4-0 to Australia. It's going to happen.
4-0 to India. 3 innings defeats. Well, James, thanks for joining us. You've been doing a great job with all the social media posts on Insta and TikTok. So thank you for that. Hopefully your Canes do better next year.
Fingers crossed. On to pre-season.
Good stuff. Paul, well, thanks for coming back after last week. I thought maybe you wouldn't turn up, but seems like we've sorted it out. Jaleesa is going to hopefully we can do more with Jaleesa, but I'm not holding my breath.
The only reason I wasn't here last week was you just sort of said basically you might just do one with Jaleesa. And I went, okay, cool. No, I'll have a week off.
Well, just because we couldn't time, like it's impossible to get all the times. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, of trying to fit everyone together. That's all. He's muted himself now. Thank goodness. Best part of the show. Anyway, well, look, we'll leave it there. Paul, thanks for joining us. James, thank you. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back next week with another podcast.